Welcome to all. Finally getting over my congestion, which is very nice. You still hear me if it's down there? Sound good in the back? Great. Okay. How many folks weren't here last week? A few. Okay. I announced last week that if you have been interested, whether you feel challenged or invigorated or whatever about the class, and would like to come with my family on a tour over there, my uncle and I and Brittany will be leading a tour in June of 2019 is the plan right now. So you got 2 years to save up for that. And I forgot my sign-up sheet again, so we've just made this little makeshift one, which I'll pass around like we did last week. If you're interested in staying informed about that, and we can send you the brochure when it's ready, you can see the prices, everything, our itinerary. Just write your email there. I don't need anything else but your email. I'll add it to our list, and then you can stay in touch that way. It's sort of a biblical pilgrimage / political tour. So we take you to most of the major biblical sites throughout Israel. You'll stay in Jerusalem. You stay up in the Sea of Galilee. You'll also stay in the West Bank, usually in Bethlehem. We go down to Hebron, which we're going to talk about today. You see the wall that we talked about last week. We'll drive past the settlements. We'll go to places like Jacob's Well. See where the traditional sites of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. I mean, all the things that you've wanted to see in a pilgrimage, we'll see. Plus, you'll encounter Palestinians and Israelis on the ground who are active in doing peace building, people who have lost loved ones to the conflict, hopefully people who were former combatants who are working for peace. It's a really fantastic trip. So if you're interested in that, and we do it about as cheaply as you can do it while staying in pretty nice places. So it's a very comfortable trip as well. So I'm going to pass this around. Were you all here last week? Okay, so we'll just start it right here. And if you're not interested, just keep passing it. If you are, just write your email and keep it going around. All right. So if you weren't here last week, the video for last week is online. I'd encourage you to watch that to get caught up. I'm going to do the most minimal recap possible just so that we're all speaking the same language today. But I'm not going to go into depth about what we did last week. That's the benefit of the videos. So when I checked last night, it looked like only 9 views of the video had happened. So I'm suspecting most folks hadn't watched it. But I'd encourage you to go back and do that if you want to get caught up. So today, and we only have 2 left, right? So we have today, and I was hoping to do an entire Q&A session next week, but that's not going to work out because we're a little bit behind. So the goal today is to talk about the last 2 of the final status issues that have to be resolved, water and Jerusalem. And then I want to give you sort of a little case study about a place called Hebron. And then next week, hopefully, we'll talk about the 1-state versus 2-state solutions. What are those about? What are some of the possibilities for reconciliation? I'm hoping that'll only take half the class, and then we'll have the other half for dialogue. So that's the goal. That's what we're working toward. All right. So the major things that you need to know from last week are that there was a major Palestinian uprising, which you should remember, in 1987 to 93, called the First Intifada. And one of the things that happened during that period was that the Palestinian National Council gave up their claim, forswore their claim to 78% of the land. Remember, up until this point, Palestinian resistance had been an attempt to undo the partition of the land that happened in 1947 and the extra land that Israel had conquered during the 1948 war and the 1967 war. Palestinians wanted all that back, and so their resistance, the terrorism, Munich, all these sorts of things were an attempt to undo all that had happened. In 1988, they realized that wasn't going to work, and they changed strategies. And so they give up their claim to 78% of the land, basically where the state of Israel is now, and say that we'll make our state in only 22% of historic Palestine, that being the West Bank and Gaza. Okay, so that's a really significant development. So they give up their claim to 78% of the land. At the end of the First Intifada, there's a big peace accords called the Oslo Peace Accords, which I'm sure we all remember. It's a very famous picture. And soon after Oslo I, there's a follow-up to Oslo called Oslo II. And what you really need to know is that the West Bank, again, part of that 22% of the land that the Palestinians said, we'll just make our state here, that gets divided up even further into areas A, B, and C. And this is complicated, but it's really significant. Area A, and I'll go here and then I'll go back to the percentages. So this is a map showing the division of the West Bank. This says nothing about Gaza. So this is the West Bank. Areas A are what you see in pink here. The major cities, Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, Qalqilia, Ramallah, Jericho, Bethlehem, and Hebron. Okay, it's Area A, which means that the Palestinian Authority technically has full control over that area. They have municipal responsibilities and control and security control. Remember, there is no Palestinian military, so it's more like a police security. So they're supposed to have full autonomy over the major cities. Then you have Area B, which are the villages around those cities. You can see these all in tan on your screens if you're looking there. Those are areas where the Palestinian Authority has municipal responsibilities, but Israel has security control. So the Israeli military would be in charge of those areas for security. And then everything else that you see in white or whatever that color is, gray, that's Area C, and that's under full Israeli control. So you can see what happened for the Palestinians. They said, we've been fighting for 100% of the land. It's not going to work. We'll take 22% of the land. And then what they actually end up getting in terms of full control is 18% of that 22%. Yeah, 7%, whatever those numbers are. Significant decrease in what they had, of course, before the partition of 47, and even significant loss after forswearing their claim to 78%. Right? So in terms of, in 18 and 22%, what is that, 40%? They have municipal control. So of the 22% they said we'll make our state in, and that's just the West Bank, they actually only get municipal control over 40% of that land. So as you can see, these look like a whole bunch of little islands in the South Pacific or something, right? I mean, it's very hard to make a united state in that kind of separation. So that's what they get in Oslo II. Then in 2000, after the failure of accords called, or an attempt called Camp David to resolve some more of these issues that Oslo didn't resolve, that fails. There's a second major Palestinian uprising. This one is much more violent than the first one. Remember, the first one is primarily targeting the Israeli economy through boycotts and strikes and refusal to pay fines and taxes. The Second Intifada is much more violent, really marked by suicide bombing. A stark rise in suicide bombing. And so you can see there was a history of suicide bombing from about late 1980s. Remember, about 20 years after the settlements were built. Don't start thinking that the settlements are any kind of response to suicide bombing. It's the other way around, right? Settlements are an expression of the Israeli control and occupation of the West Bank, and the suicide bombing is a response to that. It's a poor response, but it's a response to that. So you got a history of that, but then you can see right before the Second Intifada starts, you have 12 bombings in 3 years. Then in 2001, 40 bombings in 1 year, and 47 bombings in 2002, and 23 bombings in 2003. Right, a stark increase in suicide bombing during that Second Intifada, and we talked last time about that, about how terrorizing that must have truly been. We won't go back into that, so we can keep going. But one of the things that happens is that you'll notice here, 2002 is 47, then down to 23, then down to 17, then down to 9, then down to 6. So one question is, why did the bombings drop? And so we'll talk about that. In 2002, at the height of that suicide bombing, Israel begins building a barrier between itself and the Palestinians in the West Bank, and also in Gaza. And what you saw was that suicide bombing begins to go down. Now, another reason that it goes down, other than the fact that a barrier goes up, is that Hamas, who's primarily kind of orchestrating the Second Intifada, they change tactics, and that's when they start firing rockets. Now, part of the reason I think they start firing rockets is also because a wall goes up. I mean, these things play, into each other in that way. But we have the West Bank barrier, which some call the security fence, others call the separation or apartheid wall. And we talked last time about how can it be both a fence and a wall. Well, in some places, it is in fact a fence. These are all my own pictures, so these aren't taken from anywhere else in the world. It may not look like much of a fence, but this is electrified. It's razor wire. It's the kind of fence that you would see in the United States around a prison. Okay, it's an incarceration fence. Very difficult to get around unless you want to seriously mess yourself up. These fences appear mostly in the depopulated areas of the West Bank. In the areas where there's high concentration of Palestinians, you actually do have a wall. This is me when I was 18 on my second or third trip, I think. You can see this is not a fence. The Palestinians want you to know. This is a 25 to 50 foot wall, twice the size of the Berlin Wall, with sniper towers, razor wire, all kinds of technology around it. Trump has been in conversation with Israel about building a similar wall in Mexico. This is the kind of wall that, as I understand it, Trump has talked about building. Here's another picture of the wall. This is right through this is all a Palestinian city right here. They're actually going to talk about today, called Qalqilia. How far is the sea on the other side of that wall, Dad? Like 6 miles. On the other side of this wall is a major Israeli highway and then the Mediterranean Sea. But you'll have Palestinians who will spend their entire lives in Qalqilia and never be able to go to the Mediterranean Sea, even though it's just 6 miles on the other side of that wall. So this was one of the most striking images, I think, that we dealt with last week, where what you see in blue here is the path of the barrier, the fence and the wall. You can see it cutting in here. But this black line on the outside here is the actual border of the West Bank in Israel. It's particularly striking in this area here and here in Jerusalem, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But here's the border, right out here. And look how deep into the West Bank this wall goes. Right? It's a very significant path of the wall. We talked about how problematic it might be that perhaps you support the president saying we should build a wall on the Mexican border to keep Mexican immigrants out. You may not, but if you do, okay, it's one way to do immigration policy. But I suspect you might have a problem if the wall went around Mexico City and Juarez and some of the areas in Mexico. You'd begin to question if the problem was really immigration or if Trump wanted more of Mexico's land, right? That would be a reasonable conclusion to the path of that wall. Well, the thing here is that 86% of Israel's security wall is inside the West Bank. 86% of it. And they would have saved, I think it was $1.5 billion in construction costs had they actually built their barrier along the border of the wall. But one of the quotes from the chief architect of this wall and fence is he said, when I was building this, my instructions were to bring as many Israelis as I could onto our side of the border, as many Israeli settlers in the West Bank onto our side of the border. That's the architect of the wall saying that was my project. So again, you start to ask yourself, is the wall really about security? Or is the wall expressly about security, but actually more having to do with the taking over of Palestinian land and bringing some of these major settlements that you see here in blue back onto the Israeli side of the border? Which I think Israel would say is for security, to protect the settlers, right? The problem is the settlers are in somebody else's land. So that's the complication with the wall, okay? So now I think that we're getting into, So now we're going to look at a city in the West Bank known as Qalqilia, which you'll see, for those who are looking at the screen, it's the kind of the top of the map. If you follow the green line border on the left side, you'll see a city called Tulkarm and another one called Qalqilia, spelled with a Q. Is everyone seeing that on your screen? Okay, great. So that's what we're going to talk about there. This is one of the cities in the West Bank that is actually surrounded by the wall and the fence on 3 sides. So almost like a full prison. And there's only one road, if I remember right, that leads out of Qalqilia into the rest of the West Bank, and it is controlled by Israel. So at any time, Israel can shut it off, and they have many times, where Palestinians are not able to get in and out, and they have food shortages and all kinds of problems. So now we're zooming in on this city of Qalqilia right here. You can see the path in red of the wall and the fence. Look at it coming way out here, around here, and this is the road that goes out to the West Bank. So one question would be, why does Israel have such a tight control over this Palestinian city that I'm sure most of you have never heard of? And the reason would be, the reason is water. That's one of the reasons. And we're going to talk about water. But I forgot I had these other pictures. So right here on the western border of Qalqilia, you'll see this, just a straight red line. I showed you a picture of that wall just a minute ago. Here's a picture on the Israeli side of the wall. So if you're within Israel proper and you're looking over at Qalqilia, this is what you would have seen when it was built. And so this picture was back from 04 or 5. In 2010, I was with my Uncle Rob on a tour, and we were driving up, I think this is Highway 1, is that right? We were driving up this highway, and Rob had told the bus driver, slow down when we get to Qalqilia, I want to show people the wall. And so we were driving, and then Rob said, I feel like we should have come to it by now. And we had in fact passed it, because we went back and found it. This next picture is the exact same location. Right? Israel wanted to cover up the wall so that its citizens weren't seeing what was happening in the West Bank. And so they planted all these trees to line there. So you'll drive that highway and you'll have no idea that there's a Palestinian city just a stone's throw over that mound that's behind a wall. Now, what I heard from the bus driver was that one of the reasons that Israel did that is because some of the citizens said, please, they had asked for that, saying, please cover this up. It reminds us of the ghettos. And that breaks my heart to say, this reminds us of the ghettos, so cover it up, not take it down. Just cover it up so we don't have to see it. So, but this is what you'll see now when you drive that highway. You won't even know that there's a wall over there. In some places you can see it, but around Qalqilia, for instance, you won't. So now we're getting to the issue of water. The major thing that you need to know about water, and it's a very complicated issue, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. The major thing that you need to know is that legally, most of the water in the land, in Israel and Palestine, should belong to Palestine because it resides in Palestine. However, Palestinians do not have access to the majority of it. You can see this graphic of an Israeli citizen having a lot of water while this Palestinian man waits for it. So there are basically two major water systems, which would be there are these aquifers. There's a mountain aquifer and then a basin system. So you have places where water is stored underground and places where it's stored on land. And in either case, most of the water is inside the West Bank. Most of it entirely rests inside the West Bank. However, Palestinians have limited access to any of it. And in fact, the basin system, the surface system, is used by Israel, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and Palestinians have no access to that water, even though most of it resides within the West Bank. So, I mean, to put it in simple terms, Israel is stealing that water. There's really no other, I don't think that there's another more accurate way to frame that. That the water should be under, any kind of autonomy. For Palestine to have its own state in the West Bank, it should have control over its water sources, but it doesn't. Most of the water in the region is inside the West Bank, and Palestinians in the West Bank have very limited access to that water. In fact, 90% of the water within the Jordan Basin system is diverted, which is endangering their entire ecosystem. And Israel uses about 30% of that water as it's shared between the other countries that are not Palestine. So here...
I'm wondering, in all of the bombings, if there has been any bombings of infrastructure.
Of Israel's bombings of Palestine?
The Palestinian bombings of Israel, if any of that has been bombings of infrastructure, in other words, like breaking up dams so that they could get their water back.
Yeah, I'm not actually aware of that. I think most of the Palestinian bombings have been targeted at civilians within Israel, on buses and cafes and whatever else. Israel's bombings have often been targeted at infrastructure. In fact, they have essentially destroyed the electric infrastructure of Gaza, the water infrastructure, I believe. I mean, there was a major military campaign in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip in 2015, and a study had come out from the UN, I think just a few months before that said unless something major changes in Gaza for the better, Gaza will be unlivable by 2020. Unlivable. And then Israel bombed it to smithereens, destroyed its electrical systems, its water systems. So Palestinians have very, very limited access to clean water in the West Bank. If you're interested in these numbers, talk to my dad. This is his health field. He can talk about the diseases that are rampant in Gaza because of lack of access to clean water. I think many in Gaza only have access to electricity for about 4 hours a day, maybe. You can talk about how difficult that is to cook, to connect with the outside world, to communicate with anything. Imagine you only have 4 hours of electricity a day, and you have a family of 10 maybe. How would you divide that up, right? I mean, it's very complicated. So looking at the water usage, and OPT means Occupied Palestinian Territories. So these numbers, they may get a little bit confusing, but they're significant. Per capita water use in the Occupied Palestinian Territories is about 63 liters per person per day. What you need to know is that the WHO, the World Health Organization, recommends that the minimum people should have access to is 100 liters per person per day. That's the WHO's minimum recommendation, 100 liters per person per day. And in the West Bank and Gaza, they average about 63. Only 7% of communities are using less than 30 liters per person per day. 36 are between 30 and 50 liters. 41% are between 50 and 100, and 16 are actually over 100. Yeah, there's that. In Gaza, only 7% of the water actually meets the WHO's standards. 7% of the water. And so you have cholera, dysentery, hepatitis, yellow fever. Israel, though, uses 3 times as much water per person per day as the Palestinians. But remember, most of the water is in the West Bank, which again, I think is another reason why Israel is hesitant to put forward a 2-state solution. Because if you give Palestinians autonomy over their state, what do you do about the water that you need? Because it would seem that the Palestinians should get control of the water that's in their land. But Israel, of course, will never agree to that, because how is it going to survive? So it has a major problem on its hands when it comes to a 2-state solution dealing with water. And it has a major problem on its hands when it comes to a 1-state solution because of demographics, which we talked about, I think, last week, and we'll talk about again next week. So you're caught in this place. We don't want a 2-state solution and we don't want a 1-state solution. It'd be hard to survive either way. And I think that's one reason why the status quo continues and continues and continues. Now, one of the reasons why Israel uses so much water is because in some places they're trying to do what is impossible, what should be impossible, and at least which is inadvisable, I would say, from an ecological standpoint, which is they're trying to make flowers bloom in the desert. I mean, these are flowers growing out of sand, right? I mean, and one of the things, a doctor in a settlement in Gaza once said to my dad, one of the things that we have learned is that you can make anything grow if you put enough water into it. And there's a conversation to be had about responsibility, right? About, is it right to use that much water? Should we not be adapting our living styles to the land that we're living in, rather than trying to live a Western style life, a Western lifestyle in a place that doesn't really accommodate that? So here's another picture. This is inside a settlement. Look, you can see at the top of the picture what the West Bank terrain looks like. And then this is inside a settlement with a swimming pool and lawns that you have to mow. Again, let me be clear again, this is not me saying Jewish people don't know how to live well, right? This is not about attacking Jewish people. It's saying that this particular style that some in Israel are trying to use and trying to live in is not a responsible lifestyle in this particular climate, in this particular terrain. And in order to do this, in order to have this kind of life, you have to use a lot of water, and the water happens to not belong inside of your state. So you have to take it from somebody else, while denying the people that you're taking the water from access to the same water, at least the same amount of water. So settlers pay one price for the water. Palestinians usually have to pay between 4 and 20 times the same amount for that water. So essentially, if you're a Palestinian, you're saying, I have water under my feet. Israel's coming in. They're taking the water. They're then selling it back to me at 4 to 20 times the amount that they're selling it to their own citizens. And they're citizens that are living on settlements that are taking my land. And it's part of the Palestinian mindset. So what Palestinians have to do is, you'll see like this gray tank here. I don't know if you can see it on yours. It's right in the middle of the picture if you're looking on the screen. These are rainwater tanks that Palestinians set up on the top of their houses in order to catch rainwater, so that they have access to water if Israel ever shuts off the water. And that does happen. I've been in the West Bank for a summer in 2010 when Israel closed off access to a lot of water in that particular area. And so we went about 10 days without having running water in our West Bank apartment. And so we were just working with the rainwater that we had on the top, having to we couldn't take showers. We were having to just use washcloths to try and clean ourselves every once in a while, using minimal water to boil with in order to make food, having to just buy bottled water all the time because there's no drinking water. So those are some of the complications that Palestinians live with on a regular basis. Yeah.
Actually, all the black tanks are rubber tanks filled with water that when they pump the municipal water up into those tanks and store them, so when the water is shut off, And the IDF often uses those for target practice and will shoot those rubber tanks full of holes.
So the municipal water is pumped up in here
Into those and
when it's on to store them and
so when it's turned off, they have access to stored water.
okay, yeah.
But
But these aren't rainwater, right? These is for municipal water. I think the gray one, because I thought that the black tanks were for rainwater, and a Palestinian corrected me once and said it's actually the gray ones. But the black ones are when the water system is working, they pump water from the municipal lines up into their tanks in order to have some storage when the water shut off. And my dad was saying, in addition, Israeli soldiers, when they're practicing their sniper fire, will often use these tanks as target practice. And I actually have seen that, and I forgot to mention that if you go up on the roofs, you can see bullet holes in a lot of their water tanks.
That is stupid. They just want to kill people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to conjecture. I think it's best not to conjecture about what the Israeli soldiers want. I would say most Israeli soldiers are in the West Bank because they believe that's what's necessary to defend their country. I happen to think that that's not the best way to defend their country, but I think they genuinely believe that. And you'll see when we talk about Hebron soon, that one soldier I talked to said that he does believe that what's happening in Hebron is apartheid. This is an Israeli soldier who says this is apartheid. This is separateness. This is not right. And yet, if we don't do it, they'll use this city as a place to attack us. We have to do this. It's terrible. It's tragic. And we have to do it. So I don't think their impetus is let's go kill Palestinians. There are some who have said that very explicitly. Yeah, absolutely. But I would never want to say that Israeli soldiers' goal is to kill Palestinians. Again, remember, most of these people are 18-year-old kids. They're 18 to 22 years old. Their brains aren't even fully developed yet. You know, we should not expect them to make reasonable, rational choices all the time, which is an argument against letting 18 to 22-year-olds be in the military. But that's a whole separate topic. Whoops, just knocked my microphone off. All right. I obviously care about that a little bit. Okay, so here's a graphic to show you. This red line is the minimum recommendation of the WHO. You can see Israel has about 183 liters per person per day, and Palestinians in the West Bank who are connected to a water grid. They have about 73 liters per person per day. Now, these numbers may not mean much to you, so I pull statistics from the U.S. In the United States, the average U.S. citizen uses 300 liters per person per day, and the average U.S. family uses 1,000 liters per person per day. So you think about what you use water for. Watering your plants, taking a shower, washing dishes, brushing your teeth, flushing the commode, which is the number one highest use of water in our households is flushing the toilet. All that kind of stuff that seems very necessary to life, and you still use about 300 liters per person per day. Imagining having to do it with 73. So water is a huge issue. It's a huge issue. Many global analysts have said that while we fought many wars for a long time on oil, the next set of wars will all be fought over water. That is the next big wave of wars, is around water access. So let's now talk about Jerusalem, which is the least complicated piece of all this. It's a joke for those who know anything about this. This is a map of the old city. This is an aerial shot of the old city of Jerusalem. You can see it's a wall that's built around this from Suleiman the Great in the 1500s. I think around 14 or 1500s. It's been there for a long time. But that wall then is young in the history of Jerusalem, right? That's what I love about that city. It's like 1500s. That's very recent history. So you can see the old city wall coming around here. In the space of the old city, you have West Jerusalem over here. This is part of East Jerusalem, which I guess is going this way. No, it's going this way. And here you have what Jews and most people in the West tend to call the Temple Mount, what Palestinians will call the Haram al-Sharif. I think I put the right. Last time I said the Haram al-Sharif, but Haram in Arabic means shame. So it's spelled the same way, and when you transliterate it into English, but I think I mispronounced it. But anyway, this is the holy site for Muslims. You have the Dome of the Rock, which is a shrine built over a rock that tends to be Christians and Jews believe Abraham was a place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. Muslims would tell the story that it's where Abraham was going to sacrifice Ishmael. And then also for Muslims, it's the rock that they believe that Muhammad leapt to heaven on his horse, which I can't remember if it was either a literal leaping or in a vision. I don't remember that. But it's a very significant shrine. But here is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this is considered the third most holy site in Islam, behind Mecca, Medina, and then, excuse me, Jerusalem. So you have the third most holy site for Islam here. Right here at the base of the Temple Mount, is the Western Wall, which is the last remaining foundation wall of the temple in the time of Jesus. So has anyone ever been to the Western Wall? Oh, that's lovely. So when you go there, you cover your head. There's a place for men, a place for women, and you can go and pray at the wall, and you can write a prayer and fold the note up and put it inside the wall. It's a really lovely place to be. So that's, I think, considered the most holy site for Jews, next to the third most holy site for Muslims. And if you've been following the news at all, this has been in the news a lot, because Israel tried to put up metal detectors and start searching all the Muslims who were coming to pray here, which is a real hassle. And Muslims found that a deep disrespect to their faith. And so instead, they refused to enter Al-Aqsa. Instead, and the thousands were praying outside in the streets and nonviolent resistance. And it worked. And Israel removed the metal detectors. But most of us probably are not getting that story on CNN or the BBC or Fox News or anywhere else, because the mainstream media seems uninterested in Palestinians who are active in peaceful, nonviolent resistance. However, if Palestinians had that happen to them and then were throwing Molotov cocktails and blowing up things in Jerusalem, I guarantee it'd be all over the news.
Because wasn't it not in the news in that same area that a couple of Palestinian suicide bombers attacked Israeli?
Recently? Suicide bombers?
That's what prompted that.
Yeah,
Three
yeah.
Palestinian men killed 2 Israeli soldiers. That's
What,
what prompted
with knives or with guns? Yeah, so not bomber. Okay, I was going to say I didn't remember a bombing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what led to the metal detector.
Yes. Okay. So
But that part was in the news.
I'll
The
counter
other
you.
part, the other part is,
I'll counter you on that one point.
okay.
The story of the which led to the metal detectors, which led to the resistance, got solid coverage.
Really on mainstream media?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I didn't see it on any of those mainstream sources.
the part you talked about did not.
The nonviolent resistance, the praying in the streets. Yeah, I was picking that up on the places that cover Palestinian news, 972 Mag, the Electronic Intifada, all those places. I wasn't seeing that. If you did see it, wonderful.
It was there.
Good, wonderful. Very happy to hear that. So you have the third most holy site for Islam, the first most holy site for Jews, and then right over here you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the traditional spot where many believe Jesus was crucified and then was buried in the tomb and resurrected. Some think it's outside the city, but my grandfather, the archaeologist, would say that that is incorrect. This was a church built by Helena in 400 AD, I think, still building off of the oral traditions and oral stories of the day. And so basically, for many Christians, this would be the most holy site in Christianity. So you have the most holy site in Christianity, the most holy site in Judaism, and the third most holy site in Islam in 0.35 square miles, which I looked up is the exact same square mileage as the campus of Vanderbilt. Just to, yeah, exactly. Imagine trying to work that out. Who gets control of the Vanderbilt campus that happens to have the three of the most holy sites in the 3 largest monotheistic religions? So it's another reason why this conflict has never been resolved. So here's a picture of the Temple Mount. See Al-Aqsa just over here, Western Wall just down here to the right, and then the Dome of the Rock with the Mount of Olives just behind that. Some things about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is very divided and it's very complicated. The population of this city is 840,000, with 65% of the population being Jewish and 35% being Palestinian. Israel claims that this is the eternal and indivisible capital of the Jewish people. And in fact, they made that a law in 1980 called the 1980 Jerusalem Law, where they said that Jerusalem will always be complete and united. It is a law, an Israeli law, that Jerusalem can never be shared with the Palestinians, with the Palestinian state.
Are there no Christians living in Jerusalem?
Yes, there are Christians. Palestinian, again, is not synonymous with Muslim, right? There are Palestinian Christians. They would call themselves the original Christians, right? They've been there the whole time since Jesus, who happened to be from a place called Palestine, or that would come to be known as Palestine. And but the Christian population of Palestine is decreasing, primarily because of life under occupation. They're leaving because it's very difficult.
About what percentage is Christian?
You know, I think it's less than 2% at this point. Yeah, it's very small. It used to be as high as, I think, 10 or 15%, if I'm not mistaken. But especially since the Second Intifada, that population has decreased. The highest concentration of Christians, I believe, is in the Bethlehem area, which would make sense, right? Bethlehem, Beit Jala, Beit Sahor. There's 3 little towns right there. So, is there somebody else? Sorry?
They put a wall around Bethlehem too. So.
There's a wall right in the middle of Bethlehem. Yeah, cuts right through the heart of the city. Yep. Or right on the outskirts of the city, rather. It's not quite through the heart, but it's close. And if you've ever gone from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, you've passed through that wall. If you've gone since 2002, if you've gone before that, you should come back in 2019 with us, and we'll be happy to show it to you. We'll be sad to show it to you. We'll be pleased that you've gotten to see it with your own eyes. So Israel, the eternal and indivisible capital of the Jewish people, the Palestinian Authority says that East Jerusalem, which includes the Old City, between 1949, when the War of Independence ended, and the 1967 war, where Israel conquered the West Bank and Gaza, the East Jerusalem and the Old City were under Jordanian control. So if you went to the Old City of Jerusalem, you would have been technically in Jordan at that time. And the no man's land kind of passed right on the outside of the Old City. So East Jerusalem, the Palestinian Authority says East Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine and it is illegally occupied. The United Nations holds to a position called Corpus Separatum, which is basically what the international community has held around Jerusalem ever since the first partition plan in 1947, which, if you'll remember, when the British divided the land in 37 or 36, they said, we'll have an Arab state and a Jewish state, but Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and a path to the sea will be British territory. We're not going to give that to either side. Then in 1947, when the United Nations divided the land, they said we'll have a Jewish state and an Arab state, but Jerusalem and Bethlehem will be under international control. And they've still held to that. So the United Nations does not recognize Israel's claim over Jerusalem as their capital. Neither does the United States, neither does the European Union. And so they would say that East Jerusalem is illegally occupied. The EU says the same thing. However, what they say is that right now, we recognize that Jerusalem is and should be international territory, but we recognize that if there is to be some kind of shared resolution to this conflict, they're going to have to share the city. And I think the EU has said we recognize that we may need to have a Palestinian capital in Jerusalem and an Israeli capital in Jerusalem, but we don't have that yet. So this should be international control, which means that Israel is illegally occupying East Jerusalem. So you get to the same conclusion. The United States has a similar policy. They simply refer to the city of Jerusalem, which its final status is to be negotiated. And their embassy, the U.S. embassy, is in fact in Tel Aviv. It's not in Jerusalem. In fact, there are no foreign embassies in Jerusalem at this time. There was a big controversy because when Trump came into office, he said one of the things he was going to do was move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was a highly political move. Now, he hasn't done it. I won't say anything else. He hasn't done that. And so we still have all the embassies in Tel Aviv. But it's really interesting that I think this is still the case, but for U.S. citizens who were born in Jerusalem, on their U.S. passport, it will say place of birth, Jerusalem. Not Israel, not Palestine, not just Jerusalem. So even on their official passport, it does not designate a country for the city of Jerusalem because it's such a contested space. Okay. Now, just to throw you a little more complication, just about how complicated Palestinian identity can be, and we're not going to stay on this, but I thought it was interesting. If you're a Palestinian Israeli, so if you're an Israeli citizen who is Palestinian, you are covered by Israel's national healthcare system. If you are a Jerusalemite, and that means that you're a Palestinian permanent resident of Jerusalem, you do not have Israeli citizenship, and you don't have a West Bank ID. You're a separate category of the Palestinian called a Jerusalemite or a Jerusalem resident. And you have this blue ID card. And the West Bank, you have a green ID card. And then if you're a Jerusalemite, you have a blue one. If you're a Jerusalemite, you're also covered by Israel's national healthcare system. If you live in the West Bank, but you're in areas A and B, you're covered by the Palestinian Ministry of Health. But if you live in the West Bank as a Palestinian and you live in area C, which is controlled by Israel, you have to get healthcare from NGOs. If you live in Gaza as a Palestinian, you get it from the Palestinian Ministry of Health. And if you happen to be a Palestinian refugee, you get your health care from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine. Right? I mean, how remarkably complicated is that? All of these, are you a Palestinian living in Israel? Are you a Palestinian living in Jerusalem? Are you a Palestinian in the West Bank or Gaza? Or are you a refugee? And for all of those, you have a different access, a different healthcare system that you can access. And that is, healthcare isn't the only place where that gets complicated.
Mike, to make it even more complicated, the Ministry of Health in Gaza is under Hamas. The Ministry of Health
Yeah.
in the West Bank is under
So the Ministry of Health that covers West Bank Palestinians and A and B is under the control of Fatah, which is the political party in control of the West Bank, and the Ministry of Health in Gaza would be under Hamas. So you even have different parties over the Ministry of Health in either Palestinian territory. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a great difference between the types of the healthcare systems themselves?
Oh, there's a significant difference, yeah. And the question is there a difference between the types of healthcare systems?
I mean, if just at a glance, it's like, okay, but everybody's
Sure.
healthcare.
Israel, let me say this, because this won't be the focus. If you want to know more about the healthcare system, talk to my father right here in the striped shirt. Okay, he goes for a month every year and takes doctors to look at and practice in Israeli and Palestinian healthcare systems. So he has an expertise in that. I'll just say that from what I've heard from my dad, Israel has one of the best healthcare systems in the world. Palestinians are not even close in terms of the resources that they have.
Just to say quickly in 2 minutes, Israel has a single-payer government-funded system. That's right. I'll just yell out.
Okay.
What we would call socialized medicine. They spend about $3,500 per person per year. Everyone has access to a primary care physician. In the United States, we spend about $8,000 per person per year, and we rank between 30th and 40th internationally in terms of all our healthcare outcomes. Israel ranks in the top 10. So they have the best outcomes at half the cost of the U.S. healthcare system. You cross into the West Bank and you're talking about third world conditions. You're talking about a fragmented healthcare system. The Ministry of Health operates largely on a donor budget. Infant mortality, maternal mortality, health outcomes are all far worse than they are in Israel. The reason that's significant is not comparing the West and the East, but that under international law, Israel, as the occupying force, is responsible for the health care of the people that they occupy. But they've delegated that to the Ministry of Health. So it's a very complicated system. UNRWA, under the United Nations, is a completely separate system.
Yeah. If you want to know more about that, follow up with my dad. We have 15 minutes left, and I still want to tell you about Hebron. Thank you for that add-in. Couple really quick things about Jerusalem just to show you how complicated this is. If you are a legal resident of Jerusalem, a Palestinian who's a permanent resident of Jerusalem, you have certain rights. You can live and work in Israel without special permission from the Israeli government, and you can travel into the West Bank. So we have a tour guide for our tours who's a Jerusalemite, so he can take us all through Israel and he can take us into the West Bank. You also have access to many of the social benefits like health insurance. You have the right to vote in the local elections of Jerusalem, but you do not have a voice in the Israeli parliament. Now, there's a conversation about how democratic that is, if we'd like to have that conversation at some point. Your ID as a Jerusalem, your resident ID as a Jerusalemite is not automatically passed on to your children, unlike, of course, citizenship. For instance, if you marry, like our friend Mahmoud, who is a resident of Jerusalem, married a Bulgarian, he can't just bring her back. He has to apply for special permission for family unification. Okay? He does not have the automatic right to return to Israel like citizens would. For a Jerusalem ID, you either have to be residing in Jerusalem for a certain percentage of the year, or you have to at least be visiting once every 3 years. I can't remember exactly how it works, but there are limitations as to how long you can be gone. And for a while, there was a rule that you had to prove that Jerusalem was the center of your life. That lasted for about 4 years, and then they revoked that. And so there are all kinds of restrictions on Palestinians living in Jerusalem. And this residency, as I just said, can be revoked because Israel sees Palestinians living in Jerusalem as a privilege, not as a right. And in fact, since 1995, 3,000 Palestinians at least have had their residency expired because they were out of the country for too long. Even though, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel lived in the United States for years. So Palestinians who live in Jerusalem have certain rights within Israel, and then are also denied certain rights within Israel. So it's a whole separate category of Palestinian. Let's see, what did I have that up here? Oh, so we're going to just zoom in real quick on Jerusalem. So we got the West Bank here. Here's Jerusalem right here. We're going to zoom in. We're looking at Jerusalem again. What you see in green, of course, is the green line, the only internationally recognized border. What you see in black here is the path of the barrier. Way out here. And actually what's in red here is the area that has been declared by Israel as the municipality of Jerusalem. So Israel says the border of Jerusalem comes out to this red, and yet they built the barrier way out here around Ma'ale Adumim, which is one of the biggest settlements in the West Bank. So even according to Israel's identification of where some of their borders should be, they've still built the wall out beyond that in order to bring settlers and land back in. Okay, I'm going to skip this. I showed you this map before just to show you how absolutely divided the West Bank is. We're going to keep going. Talked about all the different checkpoints. These are a couple of pictures of checkpoints about Palestinians crossing from Bethlehem into Jerusalem and how absolutely packed it is. My brother went through once where people were shoving and shoving, and an old lady was crawling between his legs trying to get through. I mean, it's animalistic sometimes in there, because what we have found often is if you build a cage, people begin to act like animals because people don't respond well to being caged in. And that's what happens in these checkpoints. And so they go through these checkpoints, and then when they cross through the checkpoint and enter the Israeli side, which should still technically be in the West Bank in the case of Bethlehem, when they get through, they see these posters that say something like, Israel, the roots of peace. Come and feel the glory of Israel. It's the time of your life in Tel Aviv. Or my personal favorite, Israel, where it's vacation time all year round. Imagine this, that you have to get up sometimes as a Palestinian at 4 in the morning to try to get to work inside Israel at 7 or 8. You wait for hours and hours and hours. Sometimes you'll be denied. I've seen many Palestinians who were holding permission from Israel in their hand, showing it to the guard, and the guard said, I don't care what you have, go back. There's a story about it in my book if you're interested. And when they do get to go through, this is what they see. Welcome to Israel, where it's vacation all year round. I feel like I would experience that as a slap in the face, personally. And it always bothers me when I go through those checkpoints, even though as an American I have a very easy time getting through. So now I want to show you a quick case study. I have far less time than I wanted for that, about the city of Hebron. So here's an overall map of the West Bank and Israel, of course. Hebron is in the south of the West Bank here. We're going to zoom in there. You can see it just here. Hebron near the Dead Sea. And now this is a map of the city. Hebron is unique in a lot of ways like Jerusalem because it is divided into two different parts. You have what's called H1, which is everything in white and beyond, which is under the control of the Palestinian Authority. And then you have H2, which is not in white, which is under the control of the Israeli military. Right? So think of area H2 like that area C that we've been talking about. But remember, this is in the heart of the West Bank. This isn't near the border. But the city itself has been divided up. Why? Because of this right here, which is called the Ibrahimi Mosque, or the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which would be where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these folks are buried. And so it's a very holy place for many in the Jewish community. And so they have control over this. So the city itself is divided. Now, what do I have next? Okay, so we're going to zoom in here. You have the old city of Hebron here. And you have a series of settlements that have been built inside the city of Hebron. So one of the only places in the entire country where this has happened, arguably except for Jerusalem. But you have most of the settlements inside the West Bank are built on hillsides for strategic reasons and other reasons around the Palestinian cities. In the case of Hebron, there are Jewish settlements, small ones, that are built inside the city itself. So you have, and I'm sorry for those who are looking on the screen, it's going to be really hard to see, but you have the settlement, of Beit Hadassah here, Beit Romano here, Avraham Avinu, which is in the heart of the Palestinian Old City, and then this hillside here, Tel Rameda. You also have this road right here in red that's called Al-Shuhada Street, which was one of the major Palestinian thoroughfares in the city of Hebron. They had markets and homes and all kinds of bustling economy on that road. And in 2002, the Israeli military shut it down to Palestinians, said you're no longer allowed to use it. It's only for the settlers in Tel Rameda, Beit Hadassah, Beit Romano, and Avraham Avinu to connect them over here to the Ibrahimi Mosque. And this is why the book is called Letters from Apartheid Street, because Palestinians, when you walk on this street, they have signs that say, welcome to Apartheid Street. This was ours, and now we have been separated from it. And I'll show you some pictures about that. So, as you enter into the Old City, there's a road that comes, the only major road through the Old City comes right through here and out to the mosque. And you can see that there's a settlement built right above that road, right across from the Palestinian houses. one of the things that the settlers there try to do, and you will get the most extreme settlers in Hebron. Okay, these are when you think of the Palestinian extremists, the Israeli version of those, they live here for the most part. So when you walk on this road into the old city and pass under Avraham Avinu and you look up, you see this, which will be fencing that Palestinians have put up because the Israeli settlers are throwing things out of their windows onto the Palestinians below. They're throwing trash, they're throwing liquids. There's been reports of urinating out onto Palestinians. People that I've worked with there have seen couches, have seen furniture out there, throwing furniture out onto Palestinians. Here's a zoom in. You can see how heavy this is, that it's kind of falling down. I'm staying on the street looking up. This is a picture of fencing. Here's one that I took from above. Can you all see that okay? I don't know how well it's showing up. So I'm on top of a Palestinian roof here. This is a settler home here. You can see how close they are. And the settlers are just throwing stuff out onto the Palestinians below. And so they've erected this. This isn't the street. This is kind of awning and barricades that are built above the street to protect. Because this is the only major street through the old city of Jerusalem. The old city of Hebron. One of my friends spoke to a shop owner who has a rug shop there. And a settler family moved in above him. And he said that they drilled a hole in their floor and began pouring acid through their hole onto his rugs to destroy his rugs so that he would leave and they could have access to the floor below. This is the kind of stuff that happens in Hebron. It's one of the most conflicted cities, if not the most conflicted in the West Bank. So we're talking about this area here, and now we're going to look at this right up here in this area called Tel Rameda. There's a settlement here, and then Palestinian homes all around. And one of the friends of the organization that I worked with, the organization is called Christian Peacemaker Teams. Again, if you're interested in all these kinds of stories, these are the stories that are in the book. There was a friend of ours who owns a home up here in Tel Rameda, has lived here for generations and generations, has been selling, for a long time, was exporting $20,000, $30,000 worth of olives and grapes and all kinds of stuff from his land. But the settlers here want to expand their settlement, and so they've been attacking his land for a long time. So while I was there, they burned his car. This was with homemade napalm. Burned his car. It was the 8th family car that he owns that was destroyed by the settlers. And they just keep having to get really inexpensive ones. And every time they do, settlers come and they keep burning them. These are his olive trees. Look at all the trash that's been thrown on his property. These are his olive trees that were burned, no longer producing olives. And his land was poisoned so that it couldn't produce any kind of crop either. And I've always been fascinated with the logic of that if you're wanting somebody's land, why would you poison it? Right? Why would you poison it? So now we're looking, let me see if I have a map again to show you. Yeah. Now I'm going to show you this area called Shuhada Street. So again, it's this road the major road that comes right through here, connecting the settlements it's a major Palestinian road that they thrived on, and then now it's used to connect the settlements to the Ibrahimi Mosque. But this is what it looks like now. It's essentially deserted. These are all Palestinian shops and homes that Israel has welded shut so that Palestinians cannot have access to them. And you can see that the Israeli flag now is flying as a way of claiming this, this area. These are some pictures of Israeli soldiers on patrol through the old city, monitoring the usage of the old city and of those roads. Sorry. This is the most striking thing to me. So this is a Palestinian home that the doors have been welded shut, and the Palestinians, because they can't leave through their front door and have had to go up through, go back to a map. So here's what this looks like in a practical way. You got Palestinians who live right here along this road. This right here is the major cemetery of Hebron. So if you have Palestinians whose family members are buried here and they want to go and pray over their graves, they used to be able to walk across the street, right? Just like from here across the street. But now they can't. It's illegal for them to use that road. So to get to those graves, they have to go out of the top of their homes, down through stairs or ladders to get to the base of the old city, out of the old city into through H2, out into H1, and circle back around and come down this road here to get to the cemetery, instead of just being able to walk across the street. So it's not surprising that most stay, but some leave, because that is way too complicated. And when they leave, The way that the settlers claim that that home is now for the settlers is they spray the Star of David on it. And when I make that picture black and white, what does it make you think of?
Nazis.
It's striking to me that the symbol that was used by Nazis as a way to say, here are the Jewish establishments we are going to take over and rid of Jews, people, Israeli Jewish citizens in Hebron, are now using as a way to claim where they've driven out the Palestinians. Here's part of that Shuhada Street. Shuhada Street is coming from the north here, and it's circling around to the Ibrahimi Mosque, which is just behind me at this point. You can see here that there's a checkpoint set up with an Israeli soldier. Palestinians are having to walk on the sidewalk, while these two Orthodox young men are getting to walk on the main road. Here's another one, where all these Palestinian men are coming back from prayers, and they have to walk on this. It's not a sidewalk, really. It's just the side of the road. It's gravel and such. While the major road is reserved for the Jewish citizens of Hebron. So Palestinians will tell you, welcome to Apartheid Street. At the top of Shuhada Street, there are some Palestinians who live, right? I hate that I keep forgetting to put the maps in here. Here's the top of Shuhada Street that's just for the settlers, but there are many Palestinians who live here in Tel Rameda. And so there are checkpoints, like right here, and what you can see in red, where young school kids have to maybe come down this road, pass through this checkpoint, and then go to their schools over here in the H1 area, and then they have to cross back through an Israeli checkpoint to go back to their homes. And so you've got young children, like this little girl. I took this picture when I was on patrol with CPT one day, where this soldier is searching her bag. She's 7 or 8. And as I understand it, according to international law, you are not supposed to be able to do that. You are not allowed to search the bags of school children. And that was part of what CPT would do, is we would monitor these checkpoints to see, are there human rights abuses that are being violated, international law that's being violated. We would write reports and send them to the United Nations. Still, very little happens in consequence. But after he searched this girl's bag, I asked him, I said, why are you searching her bag? He said, any of them could be terrorists. She could have a knife in her bag. And I thought, really? That's what you're concerned about, a knife? Wow, the same day, I took a picture of this settler walking down the street with a semi-automatic rifle. Or this family out for a stroll, and he's got it's hard to see with the light, but he's got a rifle strapped to him. So the settlers in Hebron, inside the West Bank, in the largest Palestinian city in the West Bank, have access to semi-automatic weapons, and the school children of Palestinians are searched for knives. And if they found it, mercy sakes. They stop cars often as they drive through the old city to look and see if they have knives in their trunks. Because it's obviously a felony to have a knife in your car. When you're driving down the road. I'm sure none of us carry knives or have guns in our car or anything like that. But in the West Bank, if you're a Palestinian, you're caught with that, then you're a security threat, even if you're in your city and what should be your state, whereas the Israeli citizens who are in your city and in your state can have access to that kind of weaponry. So you have Palestinians who will say, this is a Palestinian home, caution, this was taken by Israel, you're now entering apartheid. And on the same street, you have, next to a settlement, this land was stolen by Arabs following the murder of 67 Hebron Jews in 1929. So completely different narratives on the same street, right? Depends on how you're telling the story. I had more I was going to do about... if you're interested, these are pictures of home invasions where in the middle of the night, Israeli soldiers will break into Palestinian homes, ransack the, this is the room of a child. I took this picture. You can see where the door has been busted open, glasses. You see a boot print here. And they also destroy many Palestinian homes. Let me see if I have the numbers on that real quick. Yeah, since 1967, 48,000 Palestinian homes and structures have been destroyed. And that gets us into a whole other conversation about terrorism, which we are out of time for. I'm so sorry I didn't leave time for questions. If you have questions, please come up and talk to me. If you're interested in the stories on Hebron, I recommend you get the book. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time for the last week. Thank you.